I am determined to have binge eating and powerlessness and lack of trust that people have as a direct result of weight loss diets to die with my generation. I was really overweight. I developed what I now realize was a binge eating disorder, where I was eating myself, I was using food as a drug, essentially. I didn't know that at the time. And I was just eating and eating loads. And then it eventually culminated in me kind of secretly getting a gastric band fitted. I did an undergrad in psychosocial sciences in Norwich and then a postgrad in psychology. And then I went on to work for the NHS. I did a one-year placement as an assistant psychologist in substance misuse in Northwest London. And then during that time, I was trained in all sorts of different evidence-based approaches that are used to help people to change really ingrained behaviors mainly around opiate and alcohol addiction. I was really overweight. Kids weren't super nice to me about it. And then I started dieting from a really, really young age because, of course, it was like, that's what doctors were recommending at the time. And I started to have a really mean relationship with myself. Everything from the way I spoke to myself to what I thought I deserved to how unboundaried I was to like behaviors of just like low, really, really low self-esteem to the extent where I had a lot of really shameful behaviors, a lot of codependency, a lot of anxiety, controlling stuff. I just didn't have the best time at school, to be honest. And I didn't like myself at all, like really didn't. And now that I work with people who don't like themselves, I can say with confidence that sadly I was on the more extreme end of things. And I developed what I now realize was a binge eating disorder, where I was eating myself, I was using food as a drug, essentially. I didn't know that at the time. And I was just eating and eating loads. And then it eventually culminated in me kind of secretly getting a gastric band fitted, which gave me all sorts of other issues, lying to people, lying to my friends about it, feeling ashamed, like it was an easy way out. And then I had to have it removed by emergency surgery, and it was terrifying. And when I think now about the lengths that I went to, and weirdly, the fact that I never thought to change my relationship with food, I always just thought if I was smaller, the world was telling me, if you're smaller, everything will sort itself out. So that was the angle I was going in for. Plus, I seemed to think that getting smaller would teach me how to change behaviors, which is kind of does a disservice to the whole science of behavioral change anyway. And then I went to work in addiction treatment. Long story short, when I went to uni, made the same friends I have now, and I started working in addiction treatment, and I started realizing that I was going about this the wrong way. I was going about this completely the wrong way. I wasn't meant to be making my body smaller. I was meant to understand why I didn't like myself enough to take the same advice I'd give someone else. Or I didn't like myself enough to think I was worthy of liking food. I didn't trust myself. I felt powerless. Like these were the fundamental things I should have been dealing with. So I went to therapy, and I started getting on board with the fact that I didn't need fixing. And then my habits started changing really, really quickly. And I was like, wow. The reason I personally didn't learn to like myself, and this will be different for each person, but my value was wrapped up in how I looked big time and my size. So if the scales weren't making me happy, then I wasn't having a good day. And as a result, I wasn't treating myself well in ways that may seem unrelated to other people. But I got into my head that unless you look like this, you don't deserve, it's almost silly for you to do the things that people who like themselves do. Acts of self-care, even taking pride in my appearance. All kindness was conditional on me looking a certain way. You can start with the fact that I was, if your kid in the 90s, if your kid's being bullied for being fat, and you go to the GP, they were going to put you on a diet. They were going to put the kid on a diet. So with the best of intentions, that was happening. Second of all, I think the generation, particularly of women before me, I think weight loss dieting's got a lot to answer for. In that sense, this is your goal weight and this is how you'll look, and then reward yourself with a new wardrobe because then you'll deserve it. Women who carry water bottles are slim and like all that shit. And I just think women, especially at that time, like that's all you got. That's all you were shown anyway. Successful women who made money, women who got, who were in relationships with people of value or whatever else it was, they were shown to you as a particular type of woman. And I never looked like that. So I speak to people now who are the same, who are like, they've sort of learned to put kindness towards themselves. They made it conditional on achieving a goal. They're making it harder to get there because the goal will be achieved more quickly if you take your life off hold. And I learned this. I write about this in the first book. I went to counselling and I was really, really low. This was maybe in 2010 or something like that, really low. And my North Star my whole life had been like, one day you'll be slimmer and you'll be someone who does exercise and you'll be someone who, stands up straight and does their hair and all that stuff. And then you can do all the stuff. You can start enjoying the stuff. Because at this point, I was so wrapped up in not liking myself that I wasn't even listening to like a piece of music that I liked. Because I'd be like, no, hold on, wait, my day is coming. Or even if I caught myself having a nice time, like on holiday or something, I'd look down and think, or I'd catch a glimpse of myself and think, oh no, actually, you'd be having a much better time if you'd actually sorted this out. And what I didn't realize is that none of those things had anything to do with how I looked. I just picked up this idea along the way that I didn't deserve those things because I didn't see people who looked like me being allowed to take care of themselves and being allowed to feel sexy and being allowed to feel all this stuff. I just didn't see it. And so then I had a session with my therapist and she said something that she was like, what if you never change? And I was so angry, I can't begin to tell you. And I'm not a particularly angry person, but I was really angry with her. Because I thought, well, if I don't change, then I never start living. I never start being nice to myself. That's what that day never comes. So I came out, I started thinking about it, sort of entertained it. And long story short, spent a couple of weeks acting like if I don't change, I'm never going to change. I just started doing the stuff that I was putting on hold. And then everything changed.
What changed?
Well, what I needed to address was things like boundaries, things like binge eating, having no impulse control, putting a space between trigger and response. This was what was holding me back from the results I wanted, both mentally and physically, right? So what needed to change is that I needed to do the sorts of things and engage in the sorts of habits that enabled me to put that friction in place, to put a space between trigger and response. And it turns out, if you start from a place of feeling like shit and depriving yourself of all the stuff that makes you feel calm and positive, it's considerably harder to impose that space and to calmly decide which version of yourself you want to behave from. So, as such, I was depriving myself of a real asset that could have helped me to do things in a row until they get easier, which ultimately is what I see all behavioral change as. I can see great books on behavioral change in the background there. We're all trying to make people do things in a row until they're easier. My way about it is just saying that if you're nicer to yourself and you have the same conversation with yourself in that space and you do the things that make that space calm and positive and feel mature in the way of self-care and self-soothing and self-compassion and affirmation, then you can take it choice by choice in the direction of it becoming easier until you really do update the fact, this idea, this assumption that you can't do it. I don't want anyone to go on a diet again. They didn't work. They just didn't work. Like whenever anybody says to me like, yeah, but so-and-so is overweight and it's unhealthy or whatever, they have to go on a diet. I'm like, well, no, actually quite the contrary. I'm now working with people who have not only been left not with the physical results that they wanted, but have been left with a much more serious issue, which is an eating disorder, a binge eating disorder, which is wildly damaging their mental health and their self-esteem and their ability to enjoy their lives. Most of the people who come to me now couldn't give a shit about losing weight anymore. They're like, remove this lack of trust, remove this powerlessness, like make this end. How did this come about? And that was because of weight loss diets, in my opinion.
On the back of this book, it says, this is the last diet you'll ever go on.
Yeah.
What is that diet?
It's the diet of learning to stop of trusting yourself and taking common sense advice. Now, obviously, we can go into like whose body what and blood types and da-da-da-da. But ultimately, the people I speak to are doing so many of their behaviors are causing them to gain weight, a lot of weight, because of the guilt and the shame and the all or nothing and the scarcity mindset and the feast or famine that has come with weight loss diets with the best of intentions. And so once they have managed that, and built the self-efficacy that they so deserve from managing to break the all or nothing thinking, trust themselves around food, learn to enjoy food again, sit in the discomfort of realizing that they're going to be okay without it, get on board with the fact that they find it hard when other people don't, and build their self-esteem that way and use the unhelpful behaviors as a vehicle to remembering how capable they are, then they can just take the same advice they would give to another person because they're not scared of food anymore and they're not scared of themselves anymore. And they like themselves, so they're more inclined to make judgments that feel smart. You know, I got to a stage where I was doing diets where someone would show me a banana and a canister of cream and I'd be like, well, the canister of cream is obviously better for me. That's how messed up diet. And do you know what? I know you think it's weird. I assure you I've spoken to enough people now who are going, I know exactly what she's talking about. That's the extent to which intelligent people start moving away from intelligent decisions. Because diets needed us to come back. They needed you to be powerless. They need you to need guidelines, or else you need to pay more and pay someone else and go find another guru or get another diet. As opposed to teach you how to take the same advice you'd give another person. There is no way that if someone was trying to manage their weight and they ate something bad, you would say, oh, well, you've blown it now. You should have 15 more.
You said earlier you secretly had a gastric band fitted.
Mm-hmm. Well, secretly, close friends knew, but a lot of my close friends didn't know. I was just done. When I got to my heaviest, I was like, that's it, I'm done.
How heavy?
126 kilos.
And then you had it removed in like an emergency operation?
Yeah, I'm always careful about talking about it because, again, I'm afraid that people are going to be... Actually, do you know what? I'm not promoting it by any means, sorry. I know that there are people for whom it's been really helpful, but it did not teach me to eat differently. And the reason I had an emergency operation is because my relationship with food was so profoundly important to me. I didn't understand at the time that I've never talked to anyone about this, but the band moved because I overate. But I kept having it tightened because I didn't want to be allowed to overeat. Because I thought, if I've done this to myself, and honestly, Steve, like the pain, it was horrible. It was horrible. I felt so ashamed. And then I lost a bunch of weight because it actually can, I won't go into details, but it can cause a different eating disorder. I lost a bunch of weight. People started being really nice. Like, you know, they reflect back to you your worst fears when you lose weight. They'll be like, oh, wow. We were so worried about you. Finally, now you can live your life. And you're like, shit, I thought that was just me. And then I felt ashamed because I thought like I'd copped out. And now I realize on reflection, it's extraordinary that I thought I'd copped out. And do you know what? The first version of the kindness method doesn't have that in it. I wasn't ready. I hadn't forgiven myself for being so mean to myself. I hadn't forgiven myself for feeling so shameful. And I hadn't told some of my closest friends who were there at the time, and I'm sure knew, but had the grace and the kindness not to embarrass me. But it was horrible. And the day I came out of surgery, I remember with the emergency surgery, they told me they were going to try and keep it in. And I remember I came out and the woman went, I'm really sorry we had to take it out. And I burst into tears of joy. I hated it. I hated the whole thing. I hated the lying, I hated the shame, I hated the guilt. My body didn't feel good. Because even when I lost weight, it wasn't because I was taking care of myself. It's because I was living on so little. It just felt like another version of punishment, you know? It did not do good things for me. I eat what I like. I look forward to eating. I don't feel like I need to justify to anyone what I'm eating or why I'm eating it. And great thing happened, which for me, you know, with writing self-help books and stuff, you know, especially when you're telling people you're going to change for good and I've changed for good. Well, I only wrote it 5 years ago. What do they know? You know, so sometimes you have to do things privately for your own integrity to be like, oh, thank fuck for that. And lockdown, I put on weight. I didn't eat differently. I didn't feel bad. I thought I looked great. And I was like, yes, I needed this. And then after lockdown, I got into fitness and I've lost a bit more weight. And I honestly, I don't like myself less or more. So during lockdown, what I saw was an example of what it is to just be a human whose body fluctuates without much judgment or emotion around food. And it was a wonderful, important lesson for me. And I'm really glad now on reflection, even though it wasn't planned, that I did put on weight during that period, because I needed to see that it didn't matter anymore. And it wasn't because I was neglecting myself, it's because usually I run around town all day and I wasn't doing that. And it was so lovely to just have that be for regular body reasons and not shame or guilt or sadness or abuse or numbing out or whatever. So yeah, I love food now. Plus, I'm really glad no one talks to me about it anymore because of the book that I think they're scared to. I think people don't quite know where I sit. Because I think it's fine for people to want to lose weight. I think it's really messed up that we got told for a lifetime, especially women, lose weight, lose weight, lose weight, lose weight. Oh, no, you can't go on a diet and you're not allowed to want to lose weight. You have to love your body exactly how it is. Meantime, a bunch of us tried to do what they said and came out of the diets bigger and with a eating disorder that makes us feel powerless even to follow common sense nutritional guidelines. So yeah, I don't have any problem with people wanting to do whatever they want to do. It's just that in my case, it came as a result. I was never, before a lockdown, when I'd done all this work and I had all the methods and all the things I share, there was never a time when I was overweight because I liked food or I was enjoying food or it was too much of a good thing. That's why I understood addiction. If you saw that I was overweight according to whatever, scales in society and whatever, bigger than I am now, it was always because those are the times I hated food the most. It was the bane of my life. I barely tasted it. I know. But the same if you speak to someone who feels dependent or powerless over alcohol. They're not going to be like, oh, I love booze. It becomes, when you're powerless, it becomes horrible. And so there was a space for me to like myself a lot more when I was bigger. But because I neglected all these other habits of self-care, I wasn't drinking water, I wasn't just basic stuff. At times when I was bigger, it meant that I wasn't being good to myself. But that is not the case for everyone, by any means. In fact, for many people, it's quite the opposite. So that's where I think, because it's quite a nuanced conversation and one that I've given an enormous amount of thought to, don't get me wrong,